My name is Maya Bennett. I'm 32, and last Thursday a man I had never met sent me a photo of my own front door. He asked whether his family could still check in on Friday because Linda had canceled his reservation and wanted the deposit sent again. Linda is my mother. My cabin had never been for rent. At least, that was what I believed. The man attached a booking confirmation, a receipt, and the exact directions to the gravel road outside Boone, North Carolina. In the listing photos, my quilt was folded across my bed. My coffee mug sat beside the sink. A brass key hung from a blue canoe tag in a lockbox I had never installed. 8 months of weekends were blocked on the calendar. By sunset, I knew strangers had been sleeping in my home while my mother charged me for keeping it empty. I also knew she had taken far more than a few cleaning fees. What I did not know was why she believed a spare key gave her the right to build a business behind my back. I was going to get that answer at the cabin, with the key between us. Before I take you back to the day I handed her that key, tell me where you're listening from. And if family has ever confused access with ownership, you already understand why this one still makes my hands shake. I live in Raleigh and work in operations for a regional outdoor equipment company. That means I spend my days tracking shipments, fixing schedules, and noticing when one small number does not match the rest. I'm not an attorney or a financial expert. I'm simply hard to fool once I stop trying to be polite. The cabin was the first thing I ever bought that was only mine. It sat on 2 wooded acres about 20 minutes outside Boone, with cedar siding, a metal roof, and a porch that faced a narrow creek. It was not grand. The kitchen leaned a little. The upstairs window stuck in humid weather. I loved every imperfect inch. I had saved for 6 years. I skipped expensive vacations, drove the same gray sedan, and picked up every inventory project that paid over time. When the seller accepted my offer, I sat in my car outside the title office and laughed until I cried. I had never owned more than furniture and a stack of camping gear. My mother, Linda, was the first person I called. She went silent, then said, "A mountain place? By yourself?" I heard the question under the question. She had always treated my choices as drafts that needed her approval. I told her I had already signed. That ended the debate, but not her concern. Linda lived in Hickory, about an hour from the cabin, and she had retired from the front desk of a dental office the year before. She was energetic, organized, and incapable of sitting still when someone else had a project. At first, her help felt generous. She brought shelf paper, dish towels, and 3 boxes of canned soup. She also brought opinions. The couch faced the wrong way. The green curtains looked cheap. The guest room needed a larger mirror. I let most of it pass because that was our rhythm. Linda pushed. I adjusted. Then she called the adjustment proof that we worked well together. My father had died 4 years earlier in a highway accident. After that, my younger brother Evan moved closer to Mom, and I became the person she called for everything else. I booked repair visits. I compared insurance quotes. I listened when she worried about money. None of that was unusual in our family. What was unusual was how quickly my property became family vocabulary. Linda called it the mountain house for the first month. Then it became our getaway. By spring, she was telling church friends, "We have a little place near Boone." Each time, I corrected her with a smile. Each time, she smiled back as if I were being cute. The brass key came into the story after a January ice storm. A branch had landed across the porch rail, and I could not leave Raleigh until the next evening. Linda offered to drive up. She would check the pipes and send pictures. I was grateful. I met her at a diner and slid the spare key across the table. It had a blue enamel canoe on the ring, a gift from the real estate agent. "Emergencies only," I said. "Storms, leaks, or a repair person who needs access." Linda turned the key in her fingers. "You act like I'm going to throw a party." I laughed because the idea sounded ridiculous. She handled that first storm exactly right. She cleared the broken branch, ran the faucets, and sent me a video of every room. She even left a pot of chili in the refrigerator. When I arrived, the cabin felt watched over. I hugged her on the porch and told her I did not know what I would do without her. That sentence became a kind of permission, not immediately. Nothing in this story happened all at once. Linda did not wake up one morning and decide to steal from me. She took one small step, waited for me to accept it, and then called the next step reasonable. A month later, she asked whether her friend Carol could spend one night there after a craft fair. I said yes. Carol left the place spotless and mailed me a thank you card. Linda called it proof that the cabin should not sit empty. I told her one invited guest was different from turning it into a rental. "Who said anything about renting it?" she replied. Her tone was light. I remember the pause before the question. It was the first time I felt the need to explain a rule that had already been clear. That spring was busy at work. We changed warehouse software, and I spent most Saturdays on calls with people in 3 states. I reached the cabin less often than I planned. Every time I mentioned a weekend, Linda seemed to know a reason I should wait. The well pump sounded strange. The road was muddy. A contractor might come. Her reasons were plausible. Mountain houses always need something. I sent money for a plumber, then for a replacement thermostat, then for a deep cleaning after mice got into the pantry. Linda sent photos of receipts, and I thanked her for saving me the drive. The receipts were real. That mattered later. Linda understood that a true detail could carry a false story. A plumber had visited, but not on the weekend she claimed. A cleaner had been paid, but not because of mice. At the time, I saw paper and stopped asking questions. I also made a mistake that embarrasses me now. I let her add a small lockbox beside the porch. She said contractors needed a safer option than hiding the key under a flower pot. I agreed, but I did not ask for the code. Linda said she would text it if I ever needed it. I owned the cabin, yet my mother controlled the backup entrance. That should have bothered me. Instead, I told myself she enjoyed feeling useful. I had spent my whole life translating her control into care. The translation had become automatic. In May, I finally drove up without much notice. Linda called while I was 10 minutes away. "Today," she said, "I wish you detold me." I asked why. She said the cleaner had left supplies everywhere and the place smelled like bleach. I told her I could survive bleach. When I arrived, the cabin looked perfect. Too perfect, honestly. The beds had tight white corners. Tiny soaps sat in the bathroom. A laminated card beside the coffee maker explained how to use the grinder. I asked Linda where it came from. She said Carol had made it after struggling with the buttons. There were 4 wine glasses in the dishwasher. I owned 2. Linda said she had brought extras for Thanksgiving. There was a child's red mitten under the guest bed. She said it must belong to a repairman's daughter. Every answer arrived fast enough to sound prepared. I wanted to challenge her. Instead, I picked up the mitten and placed it on the dresser. The cabin was peaceful, the creek was loud from rain, and I had driven 3 hours to rest. Starting a fight over a mitten felt dramatic. That was another mistake. Linda came by the next morning with groceries. She moved through the kitchen like a host, opening drawers before I could. When I asked again about the lockbox code, she waved toward her purse. "I'll write it down later." Then she changed the subject to Evan's new landscaping business. My brother was 29. He was always one good month from stability. I loved him, but Mom had spent years cushioning every landing. When his truck needed a transmission, she found the money. When a client paid late, she covered payroll. Then she called me to worry out loud about her savings. I helped sometimes, not because Evan demanded it, but because Linda made his emergency sound like a family weather event. We all needed to prepare. We all needed to contribute. When I said no, she became wounded instead of angry. Wounded Linda was harder for me to resist. That weekend, she asked whether I could pay for another cleaning. "The mountain dust gets into everything," she said. I looked around the shining kitchen and asked why it needed cleaning again. She shrugged. "You want to protect your investment, don't you?" I sent the money on Monday. It was not much. That is how people like Linda move a boundary. They make the first cost too small to justify a battle, then use your silence as evidence that the arrangement was fair. The stranger's message arrived 8 months after Linda installed the lockbox. His name was Caleb Ross. He wrote through my company contact page because my work profile was the only public address he could find. His note was polite, confused, and full of apologies that belonged to me. Caleb said he had booked the cabin for his parents' anniversary. He had paid a deposit to an account in Linda's name, then paid the balance 2 weeks later. That morning, Linda claimed a pipe had burst and offered to move the reservation. When he asked for a refund, she requested his banking information. He searched the property address before sending anything else. County records showed my name, not hers. That was when he found me. "I hope this isn't inappropriate," he wrote. "I just need to know whether I'm dealing with the owner." I read the message 3 times. Then I opened the listing link. The title was Creekside Cedar Retreat. The first photo showed my porch at sunrise. I had taken that picture the morning after closing and sent it to our family group chat. The description called Linda the local host and called me the off-site owner. It promised fresh linens, homemade muffins, and the warmth of a family cabin. There were reviews, dozens of them. Guests praised Linda by name. They mentioned her quick replies, her directions, and the little blue canoe key. My body went cold before my mind caught up. I clicked the calendar. Almost every weekend since February was marked unavailable. Holiday rates were higher. The cleaning fee matched the amount Linda had asked me to send more than once. I took screenshots of every page, then I called her. She answered on the second ring with, "Hey, honey, I'm walking into the grocery store." I asked whether she had rented the cabin. The line went quiet long enough for a cart to rattle behind her. "Rented is a strong word," she said. I asked what word she preferred. She said a few friends of friends had contributed toward expenses. I told her I was looking at a public listing with reviews from strangers. Her voice changed. "You're making this sound ugly," she said. "I kept the place active. Empty houses rot." I asked how many people had stayed there. She told me she did not have the calendar in front of her. I asked where the money went. Linda exhaled sharply. "We're not doing this while I'm standing beside frozen peas." She said we could talk Sunday at her house. I told her to remove the listing now. "Fine," she said, "but you're going to regret embarrassing me over something that helped you." I called Caleb next. I confirmed that I owned the cabin and had never approved a rental. I did not ask for his banking information. I asked him to forward every message and receipt, then promised I would help him find another place or return what he had paid. He was quiet, then said, "There's another family arriving tonight." He had joined a group message Linda created for guests affected by the fake pipe problem. One couple was already driving from Virginia with 2 children. They still believed they had a cabin. I left work early and drove west. The whole way Linda called, I let the first 2 calls go to voicemail. On the third, I answered. She demanded to know why I had contacted Caleb. I reminded her that he contacted me. "He panicked over nothing," she said. I was handling it. I asked about the family coming that night. She went silent again. Then she said, "They can stay, the pipe is fine." There had never been a burst pipe. Linda had canceled Caleb because another guest offered more money for the same holiday weekend. She was trying to keep both deposits while moving one family to a cheaper date. I understood that before she admitted it. The speed of her answers told me enough. I told her nobody was entering the cabin. She said I could not throw children onto the road. I said she had invited them to a home she did not own. "You always do this," she snapped. "You wait until I solve something, then arrive and act superior." That sentence almost worked. For one dangerous second, I wondered whether I was being cruel to strangers. Then I pictured the listing photo taken from my phone. I pictured my bedroom. I kept driving. I reached the cabin just after 6. A silver minivan was parked beside the porch. A woman stood near the lockbox with a phone in one hand and a little girl leaning against her coat. Her husband was unloading grocery bags. When I introduced myself, both adults looked relieved. Their names were Nora and Sam. They had paid Linda for 4 nights. Nora showed me the confirmation on her phone, along with a cheerful message sent that afternoon. Your host has handled the plumbing issue. Use the blue canoe key and make yourselves at home. The blue canoe key was already in Sam's hand. Linda had changed the lockbox code that morning and texted it to them. I looked at the brass teeth resting against his palm and felt something inside me settle. This was no misunderstanding between a mother and daughter. She had handed strangers my key after I told her to stop. I did not blame them. They had 2 tired children, a cooler full of food, and nowhere nearby to stay. A festival had filled most of the hotels. I called 3 places before finding 2 rooms in Blowing Rock. Then I paid the first night, while Nora contacted her card company. Sam tried to return the key. I told him to hold it until I opened the door because I wanted him to see that I believed them. The key turned easily. Inside, the cabin smelled like cinnamon spray and somebody else's dinner. The family waited on the porch while I walked through. Their luggage was not inside, but the house was ready for them. Fresh towels sat in baskets. A welcome card had Linda's number. The pantry held single packets of oatmeal and hot chocolate I had never bought. A small wooden sign leaned beside the fireplace. It read, "Relax, you're in Linda's place now." I stared at those words until Nora asked whether I was all right. I carried the sign outside and set it face down. Before they left, Nora forwarded every message. She had booked through a local travel page, but Linda had moved the payment off the site for a discount. That made the transaction harder to reverse. It also showed planning. Linda knew exactly which protections she was avoiding. The children waved from the minivan. I stood in my driveway holding the blue canoe key and felt ashamed, even though I had not invited them. Shame is strange that way. It often lands first on the person trying to clean up the damage. I locked the cabin and called a locksmith. He could not come until morning. I moved a chair under the back door, though nobody was coming through it. Then I opened every closet. Half of my personal things had been moved into plastic bins in the crawlspace. Family photos, old jackets, books, even the chipped bowl my father used for popcorn were packed away. In their place were neutral blankets and matching baskets. Linda had not simply borrowed my home, she had erased me from it. The upstairs closet contained 4 sets of sheets, bulk paper towels, travel soaps, and a stack of printed guest cards. Each card included checkout rules and Linda's signature. One line said, "Please do not contact the owner. She lives out of state and leaves all decisions to me." I lived 3 hours away. She had turned distance into absence and absence into permission. The lie was small enough to sound practical. That was what made it dangerous. At 9, Evan called. He did not ask whether I was safe. He said, "Mom is losing it." I told him what I had found. He already knew she had hosted people, though he claimed he thought I approved. She said the money covered upkeep, he told me. I asked whether he had ever stayed there while guests were booked. He hesitated. Then he admitted he had helped install the lockbox. Linda told him I wanted the cabin ready for rentals by summer. I asked why he never checked with me. Because she had the key, he said. In our family, Linda's access had become its own proof. That answer hurt more than I expected. Evan asked me not to call the police. I had not mentioned the police. He said Mom had been under pressure since helping with his business. I asked whether cabin money had gone to him. He swore it had not, but his voice lacked certainty. "Just meet Sunday," he said. "Let her explain." I agreed to listen. That was the last concession I made before I understood how much she had taken. I slept badly on the couch. Every creak sounded unfamiliar because I no longer knew who had heard it before me. At dawn, I found 3 cigarette burns on the porch rail and a coffee stain beneath the rug. None of the damage was catastrophic. That almost made it worse. The house had been used quietly enough to remain profitable. The locksmith arrived at 8. His name was Mark, and he asked whether I wanted the old cylinder saved. I said yes. He dropped it into a paper bag with the blue canoe key. I wrote the date on the bag, then hated how official that simple act felt. I changed the internet password, the alarm code, and the smart thermostat account. Linda had added herself as the primary contact on the thermostat. She had also created guest schedules that raised the heat before check-in and lowered it after checkout. Those schedules gave me dates. I exported them before removing her access. There were 36 check-in periods across 8 months. Some lasted 2 nights. Others lasted a week. The cabin had been occupied far more often than the listing calendar showed. At 10, a woman knocked on the door carrying a tote of cleaning supplies. She introduced herself as Tessa. Linda had texted her to do a turnover before the next guests. Tessa looked from me to the new lock and immediately understood something was wrong. I invited her inside and explained that I owned the cabin. She sat at the kitchen table with both hands around a bottle of glass cleaner. Linda said you were her daughter, she told me. She also said you hated dealing with people and gave her the place to manage. Tessa had cleaned after most stays. Linda paid her in cash or through an app. Sometimes she told Tessa to leave before noon because I was coming. She also kept a separate set of blue towels hidden in her car so I would not notice the extra laundry. I asked whether Tessa had copies of the schedule. She opened her phone. Every cleaning request was still there, including photos she sent after each job. She offered to forward them, but her thumb stopped over the screen. "Am I in trouble?" she asked. I told her no. She had done honest work based on a lie. I paid her for that morning because she had driven up. Then I asked whether Linda had ever told her not to speak with me. Tessa scrolled to a message from June. It said, "Maya may stop by Friday. Finish before 11, leave no guest notes, and put the canoe key back on the old ring. She gets anxious when the house looks commercial." I read it twice. The wording was almost tender. Linda had described my right to know as anxiety. She had made secrecy sound like kindness. Tessa forwarded the message and the schedules. Before she left, she pointed to the welcome sign I had placed face down. "She ordered 6 of those," she said. Different cabin names. Linda was not managing 6 properties. She had ordered extras because she kept changing the listing name when travel pages asked questions. That afternoon, I built a timeline. It was not a dramatic wall covered in string. It was a spreadsheet with dates, guest names, cleaning messages, and thermostat records. My job had taught me to start with what I could prove. Caleb sent his receipt. Nora sent hers. Tessa's messages filled more dates. I contacted guests one at a time through the reviews and asked only for documents they were comfortable sharing. By midnight, 9 people had responded. The payments ranged from simple weekend deposits to a large holiday balance. Almost all went directly to Linda. 2 went to Evan's business account. I called him immediately. He answered from a job site and sounded genuinely confused. He opened his account while we spoke. The transfers were labeled equipment help and truck balance. Linda had told him the money came from selling my father's old tools. Dad's tools were still in Mom's garage. Evan knew that. He had simply wanted the explanation to be true. I recognized the feeling because I had lived inside it for years. He said he would return both transfers. I told him to wait until we had a full accounting. "Maya, I swear I didn't know," he said. I believed that he did not know the source. I did not excuse the fact that he had never asked. By Sunday morning, documented guest payments totaled more than $28,000. The thermostat schedule suggested the true amount was much higher. Linda had also asked me for nearly $3,000 in cleaning, repairs, and utilities during the same period. I printed one page for the meeting, not every message, not every receipt. Just 4 columns: what guests paid, what I paid, what the property actually cost, and what remained unexplained. I wanted the conversation to stay simple. Linda had set the dining room table as if we were discussing holiday plans. There was iced tea, sliced pound cake, and a legal pad beside her plate. Evan sat near the window. I placed my one-page summary in front of Mom and kept my coat on. She did not apologize. She tapped the paper and said, "These numbers ignore my labor." I asked whether she agreed that strangers had paid to stay in my cabin. She folded her arms. I agreed that people contributed. I read one guest's message aloud. It called the payment a nightly rate. Linda said guests use casual language. I showed her the cleaning fee. She said cleaning was real work. Every fact became a word game. Finally, I asked the only question that mattered. "Did I give you permission to rent my house?" Linda looked at Evan, then back at me. "You gave me responsibility," she said. "Permission was understood." "No, it was." My voice shook, and I hated that she noticed. She leaned forward with the calm expression she used when I was a child and upset in public. "You were never there," she said. The place sat empty while I drove up in bad weather, met repairmen, washed sheets, and answered calls. I made it useful. "You benefited from every improvement." I asked where the income was. Linda lifted her chin. She had used some for supplies, some for taxes she expected to owe, and some to cover family needs. That phrase included the money sent to Evan. It also included payments on a home equity loan she had taken out after Dad died. The loan was real. She had borrowed against her house to keep Evan's business moving through a slow year. Evan stared at her as if the room had tilted. He had known she helped him, but not how much risk she carried. For the first time, I saw the fear under her control. Linda was terrified of losing the house where she had lived for 30 years. She had created a secret income stream, then convinced herself that saving one family property justified using another. Understanding her fear did not make the choice mine. I told her that. She pressed her lips together and said, "So you'd rather see me homeless than share a place you barely use?" There it was, not an explanation, a transfer of guilt. I reminded her that she had never asked me for a loan, a partnership, or permission. She said she knew I would say no. "That is why permission matters," I replied. It was not a clever line. It was simply true. Linda looked away first. Evan asked how much money had come in. Mom said she needed time to gather records. I told her I would give her 3 days. She had to preserve every booking, send the full calendar, disclose every payment, and stop contacting guests except to say the owner would reach them. My attorney had not told me to offer 3 days. I had not even called one yet. I made that choice because part of me still wanted a family solution. I believed a clear deadline could turn Linda back into the mother who brought chili after the ice storm. She agreed too quickly. "Wednesday evening," she said. Then she cut 3 slices of pound cake and asked whether we could stop treating her like a criminal. I left mine untouched. As I reached the front door, Linda held out her hand. "I need the new cabin key for the cleaners." I stared at her palm. She stared back. The request was so bold that Evan actually laughed once, from shock. I told her she would never have another key. Linda dropped her hand and said, "Then don't expect me to fix the mess you're creating." She still believed the mess was mine. On Monday, the original listing disappeared. By noon, so did 2 backup listings Tessa had identified. Linda texted me a single sentence: "You wanted them gone." She treated deletion as compliance. I asked for the records. She said her phone had reset during an update. I asked for bank statements. She said the account included private information. I reminded her of the deadline. She replied with a thumbs up. That afternoon, Caleb called. Linda had sent the guest group a message saying I had suddenly seized management and refused to honor existing reservations. She gave them my work email and told them to seek refunds from me. Within 2 hours, I had 11 angry messages. One guest threatened to report my company because he thought the cabin belonged to my employer. Another posted my name in a travel group beside the word scam. I had given Linda 3 days to tell the truth. She used the first day to erase evidence and place me between herself and the people she had charged. That was my mistake, and it changed what happened next. I called my manager and explained enough to keep the complaints from surprising her. Then I set an automatic reply on my work account directing guests to a private address. I spent the evening matching names to receipts while my dinner went cold. Most guests were angry at first. Their anger softened when I sent the county ownership record and Linda's message about the fake pipe. I did not ask them to trust me. I gave them facts, a phone number, and a written plan for refunds. I could not safely honor the reservations. My insurance did not cover short-term guests, and the cabin had never been inspected for commercial use. I canceled every future stay. For people already traveling, I helped locate other lodging. For everyone else, I returned documented deposits from my own savings. Writing those refunds hurt, not because the guests were wrong, but because Linda had already taken the money. Each payment felt like buying my own house back one stranger at a time. Caleb refused the extra amount I offered for his trouble. He said he only wanted his parents to have a place for their anniversary. Tessa helped me find a legitimate rental nearby, and the owners honored the original price. That small kindness kept the week from becoming entirely ugly. On Tuesday morning, I met with a civil attorney named Claire Morgan. I chose her because she explained things without performing outrage. She reviewed the deed, the guest receipts, the messages, and my payment records. Claire said the key gave Linda physical access, not authority to rent the property or keep the income. The written messages mattered because they showed concealment. The guest payments mattered because they showed the amount. My own transfers mattered because they showed I had been billed for expenses twice. She also told me what the records did not prove. They did not show every cash payment. They did not reveal exactly where the money went. They did not guarantee that I would recover all of it. I appreciated the limits. Clear limits felt safer than Linda's flexible truth. Claire sent a preservation letter that afternoon. It instructed Linda to keep booking records, messages, bank statements, and receipts. It also demanded that she stop representing herself as my manager. The letter did not magically solve anything. It gave my boundary a date and a paper trail. More important, it ended the private family window I had offered. Linda called before Claire had finished emailing me a copy. "You hired a lawyer against your own mother?" she asked. I said I hired someone because my mother deleted business records after promising to preserve them. She began to cry. Linda rarely cried during conflict. She became quiet and let the other person imagine the pain. "I kept that place alive for you," she said, "and now you're trying to ruin me." I nearly apologized for her fear. The word rose to my mouth from years of practice. I swallowed it. "Send the records," I said. "That is the only conversation we're having today." She hung up. 10 minutes later, Evan texted that Mom was shaking. I sent him Claire's letter and the guest message that blamed me. "Read both," I wrote, "then decide who created this." He did not answer until evening. When he did, he said he had returned the 2 transfers to Linda's account. He also said he would no longer speak for her. It was not a dramatic apology, but it was the first time he stepped out of the role she assigned him. Wednesday's deadline passed without a full accounting. Linda sent photographs of grocery receipts, gas slips, and hardware store purchases. Several were legitimate cabin expenses, others were not. One receipt was for paint in a color I had never used. Tessa recognized it from Linda's laundry room. Another was for a ceiling fan installed at Evan's office. A third showed groceries purchased on a weekend when a guest review praised Linda's welcome basket. The most insulting item was a cleaning invoice Linda had sent me in July. I had paid it the same day. Tessa's schedule showed that the cleaning followed a 5-night guest stay. The guest had also paid a cleaning fee. Linda had been paid 3 times around one set of dirty sheets. The guest paid to stay. The guest paid to clean. Then I paid to clean again. When I saw it laid out, I pushed my chair back and walked around the room because sitting still felt impossible. By combining guest receipts, cleaning dates, payment screenshots, and the surviving calendars, I reached a defensible total. Over 8 months, Linda had collected at least $47,600. Cash bookings could have made it higher, but I refused to claim what I could not prove. $47,600 became the number everyone remembered. Linda called it revenue before expenses. Evan called it impossible. I called it money earned from a house she did not have permission to sell by the night. Claire asked what outcome I wanted. I said I wanted the rentals stopped, the guests repaid, my costs returned, and every form of access revoked. I did not ask for punishment. I asked for control of my own property. The next weekend, I returned to the cabin with trash bags and a screwdriver. I needed to remove the rental signs and put my belongings back. The work should have felt practical. Instead, every drawer held a small reminder that Linda had built a version of my life without me. There were spare toothbrushes beneath the sink and a guest journal on the coffee table. I almost threw it away unopened. Then I saw the first page. Linda had written, "Welcome to our family retreat. My daughter handles the paperwork, but I am the heart of this home." Guests had filled the journal with ordinary memories: pancakes on the porch, a first snowfall, a child catching a tiny trout and releasing it. None of those people knew they were participating in a betrayal. Their happiness made the violation more complicated, not less. I turned each page looking for damage and found gratitude instead. Linda had been a good host. She answered late calls. She left muffins. She found a lost stuffed rabbit and mailed it back. That truth mattered too. She was not careless with the guests. She was careless with me. In her mind, being useful to strangers may have balanced what she took from her daughter. It did not. Near the back of the journal, one guest thanked Linda for sharing the cabin your husband built. My father had never seen the place. I bought it 2 years after he died. Linda had borrowed his memory because it made her story warmer. That lie broke something I had kept protecting. I sat on the floor beside the couch and let myself be angry without organizing it. For years, I had believed calm meant never making another person uncomfortable. It actually meant choosing what to do after the discomfort arrived. I packed the guest journal with the other rental materials, not as a trophy. It showed the public story Linda had created, including the claim that she owned the heart of the house. The journal also showed why people trusted her. On Sunday, Linda sent a 4-page letter to Evan and me. She called it a proposed family accounting. The document listed her driving time, hosting labor, laundry, phone calls, and brand development. She valued her work at a rate she had chosen after the fact. After subtracting her claimed fee, mileage, household supplies, and the money used for family needs, Linda said she owed me nothing. According to her math, I owed her more than $12,000. I laughed when I reached the total. It was not a happy sound. She had turned unauthorized profit into unpaid wages and expected the vocabulary to change the direction of the debt. The final paragraph offered a solution. I could recognize Linda as the cabin's manager, let her keep a share of future bookings, and withdraw the attorney's letter. In exchange, she would stop discussing the matter with extended family. It was a threat wrapped as peace. She had already started discussing it. An aunt in Tennessee left me a voicemail about gratitude. A cousin I had not seen in 6 years sent a message saying Mom deserved retirement income. I replied to nobody. Claire advised me to keep communication direct and written. More importantly, I had stopped believing that a perfect explanation would win a family vote. The property deed did not change because a cousin misunderstood me, Evan called that evening. He had read Mom's proposed accounting. "She wants you to pay her?" he asked. I said yes. He was quiet, then admitted she had told him the cabin was partly hers because she had contributed labor. "Did you believe her?" I asked. He said he had wanted to. If the cabin was a family project, then money sent to his business felt less like money taken from me. His honesty was painful, but cleaner than another excuse. I told him the main confrontation would happen at the cabin the following Saturday. Linda had demanded to walk through her claimed improvements and retrieve personal supplies. Claire wanted a neutral exchange, but I chose the cabin because the fall story had grown there. Evan asked whether he should come. I said he could witness, but he could not negotiate for either of us. He agreed. Then he asked what I would do if Mom refused to return the key. "The key no longer opens anything," I said. Saying it aloud gave me a calm I had not felt all week. On Monday, Claire sent Linda a final written offer. Return the documented money after legitimate expenses, cover the guest refunds, surrender all access, and sign an agreement never to represent herself as manager again. The repayment could be structured. The boundary could not. Linda rejected it within an hour. She wrote, "I will not confess to stealing from my own family." Then she repeated that she had saved her house and helped Evan without asking me for anything. That last claim was almost impressive. She had taken access, money, privacy, and choice, yet because she never formed the words, "Can I have this?" she believed she had asked for nothing. By midweek, the guest group had sent enough receipts to confirm nearly every occupied date. One guest included a photo of Linda beside the porch lockbox, holding the blue canoe key and a clipboard. The date matched a weekend when she told me the road was closed by mud. I placed that photo beside her text about hiding the guest materials. Together, they showed access and intent. The payment records showed the money. No single item proved everything. The pieces agreed with one another. Tessa also forwarded an order confirmation Linda had sent her. Linda had asked Tessa to collect the package and use a private email so Maya won't get confused by business chatter. The phrase would matter when Linda later claimed she thought I knew. I spent Friday evening putting the cabin back together. My father's popcorn bowl returned to the shelf. My green curtains came out of storage. I removed the laminated coffee instructions and left the machine unplugged. At the front door, I installed a plain wooden hook. The new key hung there without a tag. I kept the old blue canoe key in the paper bag from the locksmith. It would sit on the table during the meeting, useless but recognizable. Claire offered to attend. I asked her to remain available by phone instead. I needed legal guidance, but I did not need her voice in place of mine. The choice at the cabin belonged to me. Saturday morning came cold and bright. The creek moved fast beneath a thin skin of ice near the bank. I set 3 mugs on the kitchen table, though I doubted anyone would drink. In the center, I placed the paper bag holding the old lock and the blue canoe key. Linda arrived 10 minutes early in her beige crossover. Evan followed in his truck. She carried a thick accordion folder and 2 plastic tubs marked cabin. When her old key failed at the front door, she tried it again with more force. I opened the door from inside. Linda held up the key. "What did you do?" she asked. I stepped aside and told her the lock had been changed after the last unauthorized guest. "You changed it without telling me?" She sounded stunned by the discourtesy. I reminded her that it was my door. Evan looked at the ground. Linda entered and stopped in the living room. My green curtains were back. Dad's bowl sat on the shelf. The guest sign was gone. Her face tightened as she took in each change. "You stripped everything I built," she said. I told her I had put my home back. She set the accordion folder on the table hard enough to rattle the mugs. Evan sat near the window. I took the chair across from Mom. The old blue canoe key lay between us in its open paper bag. Linda reached toward it, then pulled her hand back. "I brought every expense you demanded," she said. She opened the folder and spread receipts in careful rows. There were gas slips, store receipts, and handwritten notes about hours worked. The display was meant to look complete. I asked whether the folder included guest payments. Linda said we had to calculate her contribution first. I repeated the question. She said, "Income means nothing until labor is valued." Evan asked her to answer. She gave him a wounded look. "I'm the only reason this place produced anything," she said. "Your sister visited when it was convenient. I did the work." I placed my one-page accounting beside her receipts. The first column showed guest payments we could document. The second showed cleaning fees. The third showed money I sent for the same work. The final figure was $47,600. Linda barely glanced at it. "Gross revenue," she said. "That number is designed to scare people." I told her it was designed to count what entered accounts she controlled. She pulled out her proposed management agreement. "Sign this, and the whole thing becomes simple." The paper gave her a share of future bookings, repayment for past labor, and authority to manage the cabin. I asked why I would approve the arrangement after discovering it through a stranger. Linda smiled without warmth. "Because now you can see that it worked." That was her strongest argument, not that I had agreed, not that the money belonged to her. Only that the secret had been profitable. I slid Caleb's booking confirmation across the table, then Nora's, then the photo of Linda holding the blue canoe key beside the lockbox. "These show bookings," I said. "They do not show permission." Linda pushed the photo away. "You gave me the key." I opened Tessa's message on my phone and read the line about finishing before I arrived, removing guest notes, and putting the key back on the old ring. For the first time, Mom's expression changed. She looked toward Evan. "Tessa misunderstood," she said. Evan asked what part she misunderstood. Linda said she hid the commercial look because I was sensitive. She claimed she planned to tell me once the cabin had earned enough to prove the idea. I asked how much proof she needed. 1 weekend? 10? 8 months? You would have shut it down, she said. Exactly, I answered. That was my decision to make. She stood and began gathering the receipts. I told her we were not finished. "I am not sitting here while my own daughter calls me a thief," she said. I had not used that word. She had. The room went still around it. Evan asked where the money was. Linda said some remained in savings. Some had paid the home equity loan. Some had covered business expenses when his clients were late. Evan pressed both palms against the table. "I never asked you to take from Maya," he said. Linda turned on him. "You asked me not to let you fail. What did you think that cost?" He said he thought she used her savings. Linda laughed once. "My savings were disappearing. I fixed the problem. That is what mothers do." Then she looked at me. Her anger softened into appeal. "Your father would understand. He believed family property should support family." I told her Dad had never known this cabin. She had put his story in the guest journal anyway. Linda's eyes widened. She had forgotten the journal. I placed it on the table and opened to the line about the cabin her husband built. Evan read it over her shoulder. "That was hospitality," she said. "People like a story." I asked whether my ownership was also just a story she could improve. She closed the journal. "I made people happy here," I agreed. She had been attentive, warm, and capable. That was why guests trusted her. It was also why the deception worked for so long. Linda seemed surprised that I gave her credit. For a moment, the fight left her face. I told her she could have built a real rental business. She could have managed someone else's property with consent. She could have asked me to invest. "You would have said no," she repeated. I nodded. "Maybe." A no would still have been my answer. She looked toward the porch, where the lockbox remained screwed to the wall. Then she turned back with the expression I had seen before every family demand. "I'm your mother," she said. I didn't need permission to take care of what belongs to this family. I touched the blue canoe key with one finger. I gave you a key to protect my home. You used it to sell my trust by the weekend. No one spoke. The sentence did not feel triumphant when I said it. It felt final. Linda's face flushed. She said I was choosing a building over her. I told her the building was never the choice. The choice was whether I had a right to say who entered it. She had answered that for 8 months. She accused me of wanting her to lose her house. I said I did not. The repayment offer allowed time. She accused me of humiliating Evan. I reminded her that she moved money through his account without telling him the source. Every shield she raised belonged to someone else. Her house, Evan's business, Dad's values, the guest's happiness. I kept bringing the answer back to her decision. Finally, Linda tapped the agreement. Sign it, and I can keep paying you back through bookings. I pushed the paper toward her. There will be no more bookings, I said. Not one. I opened my laptop. Claire's final notice was ready. It revoked every claim of authority, demanded the documented funds, and confirmed that future communication about money would go through her office. Beneath it was my authorization to proceed if Linda refused. Mom looked from the screen to me. You would file against me, she asked. I told her I had delayed that step so she could account voluntarily. She had used the delay to delete records and blame me. She reached across the table and closed my laptop halfway. The gesture was small, almost parental. Stop, she said. Think about what people will say. I opened it again. I have thought about that my whole life. Then I signed the authorization and sent it to Claire. The email left with a soft chime. Nothing shattered. No one shouted. But the private argument ended in that moment. Linda stared at the screen. Evan leaned back and closed his eyes. I felt sick, relieved, and deeply sad all at once. I stood, took a screwdriver from the counter, and walked onto the porch. The lockbox was fixed to the post with 4 screws. My hands shook on the first one. Evan came outside, but he did not offer to finish. Linda followed us. That box is mine, she said. I told her she could take it when it was no longer attached to my house. The last screw dropped into my palm. I pulled the lockbox free and placed it in one of her plastic tubs. Then I added the old lock and the blue canoe key. The key landed with a bright little clink. Linda flinched as if it had been thrown. I carried both tubs to her crossover. They held spare sheets, welcome cards, soaps, and the pieces of a business she had built on borrowed access. I set them in the cargo area and closed the door. Back inside, I gave her a written list of the personal items she had removed to the crawlspace. Everything was accounted for. Nothing of hers remained in the cabin. Linda stood in the doorway. So that's it, she asked. I told her the next step depended on whether she returned the money and corrected what she told the guests and our family. She asked whether she could call me. I said not about the dispute. She could write to Claire. Personal contact would wait until she could speak without turning her choice into my cruelty. For once, Linda had no better phrase. She walked to her crossover, climbed in, and drove away with the useless key in a plastic tub. Evan remained on the porch. He said he was sorry. Not only for believing Mom, but for letting her access stand in for my consent. I thanked him. I did not tell him everything was fine, because it was not. When his truck disappeared down the road, I closed the front door. The new lock caught with a clean, ordinary click. That was the sound the cold opening had been moving toward, though I did not understand it when Caleb first messaged me. Claire filed the civil claim the following Monday. Linda received it 2 days later. The document did not call her evil or ungrateful. It listed the property, the payments, the guest refunds, and the access she had used without permission. That plain language affected her more than anything I had said. She could argue with my tone. She could not argue with dates that matched independent receipts. Within a week, Linda hired her own attorney. The angry family messages stopped. Her attorney produced bank records, and the full picture was both better and worse than I expected. She had not spent the money on vacations or jewelry. Most of it went toward her home loan and Evan's business. That made the motive understandable. It did not make the method acceptable. Need can explain why a person crosses a line. It cannot move the line after the crossing. The records also confirmed that Linda kept a reserve for cancellations. She had enough to repay every guest balance immediately, yet she sent those people to me instead. That choice ended my last doubt about whether she had simply panicked. The settlement took 6 weeks. Linda returned the reserve, transferred the remaining savings, and agreed to a secured payment plan for the rest. The plan covered the documented rental income, my guest refunds, and the expenses I had paid twice. She also signed a statement saying she had no ownership or management authority over the cabin. She sent a correction to the guest group and to the relatives she had contacted. It was not a warm apology. It was accurate. Accuracy was enough for that stage. I had spent years accepting warmth without accuracy, then wondering why I felt unsafe. Evan repaid the transfers that had passed through his business. He sold a trailer he rarely used and did not ask me to excuse the delay. More importantly, he stopped asking me to soften consequences for Mom. He and I did not become instantly close. Trust does not rebuild because one person finally agrees with you. We started with short calls and direct answers. It was slower than the old family rhythm, but it was honest. Linda and I had no personal contact for 4 months. She made the first payments on time. On the 5th month, she mailed a handwritten note to Claire's office and asked that it be forwarded to me. The note did not mention her house, Evan, Dad, or what other people thought. It said, "I knew you would refuse, so I decided your answer did not count." I am beginning to understand that this was the worst part. There was no demand at the bottom, no request for a key, no deadline for forgiveness. I read it twice and placed it in my desk drawer. I did not drive to Hickory and fall into her arms. I sent one reply. I told her that understanding had to continue through action and that I was not ready for a visit. She wrote back, "I understand." Then she respected the answer. That was new. It did not erase the rentals, but it was the first behavior that made a future relationship possible. The cabin stayed private. I considered selling it because every room held traces of strangers and lies. Instead, I spent a weekend repainting the guest room with Tessa. I paid her for her time, and she let me choose a color Linda would have hated. Caleb's parents eventually took their anniversary trip at another cabin. He sent me one photo of them beside a fireplace and wrote, "They had a great time." I saved the message because it reminded me that fixing harm does not always require becoming responsible for the person who caused it. The guest journal remained in a box for months. One rainy afternoon, I removed the pages that contained private names and addresses, then kept a few harmless notes about the creek and the snow. The memories belonged to people who had acted in good faith. I threw away Linda's opening page about being the heart of the home. A house does not need one person to declare herself its heart. It needs the person with responsibility to decide how it is used. Almost a year after Caleb's message, I drove up alone on a Friday afternoon. No stranger's car waited in the gravel. No laminated rules sat beside the coffee maker. The lockbox had left 4 small holes in the porch post, and I had chosen not to fill them. Those marks reminded me that access can leave damage even after it ends. They also reminded me that damage is not the same as permanent control. Inside, the green curtains moved in the open window. Dad's popcorn bowl sat on the shelf. On the wooden hook by the door hung one plain brass key. It had no blue canoe, no guest code, and no story attached to it by anyone else. It opened my home. It belonged to me. For the first time, that felt like more than a fact on a deed. If someone in your family has ever treated your kindness as permanent permission, remember this. A key can be returned, a lock can be changed, and an answer can still be no. Tell me what boundary you had to reclaim, and whether the people around you learned to respect it.